podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello everyone and welcome to How Are the Podcast. It's Gav and you join us for another episode and I'm knackered, as you can probably hear. You might notice I've not been on a pod all weekend. That was because my mates were torturing us in Magaluf on me stag do, and that's why I sound like this, which makes us sound a bit more raspy and a bit more sexy, I want to say. A bit more like Sean Dyche, we'll put it that way. So I'm expecting my two mates with me today to do all the heavy lifting, so I don't much. Anyways, first up, I've got Chris with us. Hello, mate.
All right, mate. You realise I'm just going to keep asking you questions? I'm going to keep throwing stuff back to you today.
I'm just going to say no comment. Also with me is Jonny Hawley. Hello, mate.
All right, mate. It's nice to have you back. You know, injuries to the throat and all. But we'll help you out a bit, but also we definitely will be horrible and evil and make you talk in about 20 minutes. Well, get ready.
People have been being horrible to us all weekend, you know, dirty shots and pints and top shelf.
How did you get through it all? A whole weekend away in a sunny country on the lash. Ugh, well, some people just have it so hard, don't they?
I've got blisters all over my shoulders because I fell asleep pissed in the pool. Yeah, just don't do it. I'm getting too old for this, man. At least I had an excuse to do it as me stag do. But anyways, we're here to talk about transfer stuff because Sunderland have decided to get going, I think. It seems we're starting to see more stronger links, I guess, in the media with certain players. And because as though since I last did a pod, which was with Andrew, the Florent Casolfi reaction pod, that things seem to be motoring. And as we record this today, there's a few new stories out there. I want to start with Bulka, who, if you haven't heard of him, plays for Nice in France. Coincidentally, the ex-club of the incoming director of football, and he's a goalkeeper, 25-year-old, 6'6" Poland international. And an interesting one because I didn't think we'd be in for a proper goalkeeper. I thought we'd probably make do, maybe bring somebody young in. But it seems like we're going all out and we're going for somebody who's he's been linked with Man United. I know, yeah, they're a bit of a basket case these days, but, you know, obviously a proper player. And I'll come to you first, Jonny. What do you make of this? What does that say about strategy, Anthony Patterson? You know, room for sentiment? Because, you're bringing a goalkeeper of this repute. He's not coming to just warm the bench, is he?
It's bad news for Patterson, I think, first and foremost, because it's Fabrizio Romano's been tweeting about this as well, hasn't he? And I think he generally tends to be sort of on the money or at least not miles off when it comes to stuff to do with us.
Well, the suspicion is he gets his info from a very high place.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if he's reporting that we're seriously interested in this lad, then whether he specifically is the one who comes in or not, I think it does tell you that we are after a keeper. And if this is the calibre of player that we're going after, it tells you that we're after a number one. Because you rightly say he's not going to come here and think, I can't wait to sit on the bench for 38 games all season and watch Patterson play. You know, he's been linked with big clubs in the past and, you know, he's going to come with some pedigree. So, yeah, I think if I was Anthony Patterson, I'd be starting to look over my shoulder. And it is quite ruthless, I think, from the club to identify that as a position that they need to improve. But like you say, there's not really any room for sentiment, is there? You know, if you ask every Sunderland fan, in an ideal world, would you like to see a team full of academy graduates? Most of us would say, oh yeah, that'd be brilliant. But also, if you ask every Sunderland fan, would you quite like to stay up this season? I think everybody would say, yes, please. So, yeah, for me, I have sympathy for Patterson because I think he was excellent in the playoff final, and I think you don't rack up. I mean, has he passed 150 appearances for us in the league now? He certainly must be there in all competitions.
Yeah, he probably is, I would have thought, yeah.
And you don't notch that many appearances without having something about you. And, you know, he's been there at both the playoff finals, so he's more than played his part. But I'd be looking at that position and thinking we could do better this season. And, you know, if that means Patterson's got to either be moved on or take a back seat for this season, then, you know, it's a shame for the lad, and it's you know, it's not what you'd want if you could have everything your own way. But I think, the landscape of European football being the way it is means we're likely to be able to find foreign options in other leagues of equal or better standard for less money than you'd be paying for an English lad. So with half an eye on sales as well, you'd be thinking, Patterson, we could probably fetch a decent, tidy profit for, even just as somebody to make up the numbers for a sort of homegrown quota type thing. So totally see the logic, and I'll be excited if this lad comes in, if he is as good as people say he is. But yeah, there is that little bit here that is just a little bit like, it's a bit of a shame.
Yeah, I mean, as was mentioned there, this has come from Fabrizio Romano, and we know he's pretty reputable, and his words were ambitious project. It does feel like that, doesn't it? Some of these moves we're hearing about. I mean, I don't know much about this lad particularly, but he's obviously well known to the guy who's coming in, and Man United apparently looking at him. We're obviously looking to make as many big moves as we can. I mean, I wasn't expecting a big name goalkeeper to come in, but it does feel ambitious, doesn't it? It feels like we're not just coming to the Premier League to make up the numbers. We're going to try and do this properly and have a proper go.
Yeah, and look, I think the powers that be at the club, like especially, he's shown in the past that there's not much room for sentiment. And although there's two different sides to it, so we're looking at the kind of instances like the Corey Evans thing scenario. He was out injured, and we kind of and let him come back and looked after him, and that's completely different. Because there's a couple of ways of looking at it when it comes to sentiment. And look, after his heroics at Wembley, I think everyone, and the fact that he's a local lad, everyone will want him to be, number one next season. But, thinking back to how this club have done things in the past, I mean, you look at, on one hand, they do look after players. When you look at the likes of Corey Evans and getting injuries, and they look after players like that. But when it comes to improving the squad management, I think they're absolutely ruthless. And I think this is just another, if this goes ahead, it's a big if. It's just, it's a long list of rumours as we're talking 40 players or so. I think the list is ever growing. So, and there's still only Lefebvre who's officially come through the doors. So, I mean, look at this fella, and he's the same age as Patterson, and he's highly rated. But it can only be a good thing. I mean, we can't just say, Patterson's a local lad, he's done well for us, so he should, he should be our number one all season. It's a good thing. I mentioned halfway through last season, I think it might have been around the time Patterson had the wobble, but I was looking at the first. I mean, and you've got three keepers there, who, you even had Bishop, who was pushing him to start with, and then we've got Matty Young, and we brought Moore just to say, well, you're 35 years old, and you're going to sit on the bench. So he's never really been pushed. And, we did talk about whether Matty Young would be brought in, and it was interesting listening to David Priest, because I thought, is Matty Young going to be sitting on the bench listening to David Priest 2028? And that's good. And just in terms of contracts as well, Patterson just signed a contract till 2028. So I think he recently extended that out, didn't he? Straight after the season finished. So look, I'd comfortably up there, and we knew kind of the playoffs as a target. This season, one mistake could be the loss of 200 million quid or something like that going forward. I mean, it's that tight. So I think they'll be ruthless. They'll bring this lad in, and then it's up to them to fight it out, and then it's the manager's choice, isn't it?
Yeah, interesting profile of player as well, Jonny. 6'6". So, we talked about Patterson quite a bit this year, and a lot of the criticism of his game has been
control of the box.
Yeah, control of the box, coming for corners, which I actually think he's got better at. I do think he's improved. But interesting, they've went out and decided we need, if this is true, somebody a little bit bigger, a little bit more, fills his frame out a bit, stature there. I think, if you can't.
They've taken the Costel Pantilimon approach to finding a new goalkeeper. Yeah. It's just get somebody who looks like he's been through some sort of stretching machine.
Hope he's better at getting down to his left than Pantilimon was.
Yeah. Which we exploited a few times again. But yeah, no, I think it is interesting because you're right. It's a totally different profile of player. And I think it speaks volumes about where they see Patterson to have been going wrong as well. a concerted effort whenever we've gone out and tried to bring in a first team ready player to address an area of weakness. So first season back in the Championship, we were like, right, we need a first choice centre half. So we went out and got Dan Ballard, who was a big, he's a big bruiser. He's great in the, he's still like, he's decently quick. He's not ridiculously slow or anything, but that was an area where when you had, the likes of Luke O'Nien and stuff lining up at centre back, and even Bailey Wright, who was only, I think, 5'11", I want to say, that was clear, we need this profile, so we're going to get it. And they've, they did the same, when they brought Wilson Isidore in as a striker, it was like, we've got nobody who's pacey and direct and can finish. So that's what we went and got. So yeah, if this is the type of keeper that they're after, then I think it does signal that they've certainly identified similar things to what you just mentioned there. And I think we've all talked about through the season with Patterson. The only area I think that's probably still going to be a concern would be kind of communication and organisation, which I think is something Patterson's maybe struggled with at times, not necessarily being able to impose himself in terms of directing the back four and getting people into position and just that command and presence. How much is a new goalkeeper coming in going to be able to do that kind of from day one? That's a question mark, but it's, obviously that's one for the coaching staff to try and sort out as well in the leadership group and stuff. But yeah, I think it does, it suggests to me that if this isn't the lad we sign for a reason, whoever the next one they go to in the list is going to be a similar type of keeper.
Yeah, well, I think that positionally, if we're looking at a different profile of goalkeeper, Chris, can only be a good thing. I think it may well be this lad has weaknesses that Patterson has as strong. I don't know. I'm not. When I first saw the story, I was a bit like, I don't know whether is that the right thing to do, is to go out and get another goalkeeper. But then the more I think about it, I just think, just again to touch on something you just said, I think proper competition is there are a couple of positions where I think we've maybe let that slide. I think fullback's probably another one, and we'll come on to fullback in a minute. But I just think Patterson at this stage, that's what he needs, doesn't he? He needs properly pushed, and if that means we bring in somebody better than him, and he's got to prove every day in training. Because there was a spell last season where I think we all saw it. He wasn't playing well. People were criticising his weight. People were coming out and saying he does this and he does that, and he needs to concentrate more on training and trimming up a bit. And I think he did. But it's almost as though the club will bring somebody else in now and say, well, that can't happen again. When you're in the Premier League, you've got to be on it every day just to get a chance.
Yeah. It's funny, I always remember Premier Passions, and because Peter Reid took a lot of stick for not signing people. And he was like, I'll only sign people who are better than what I've got. And I think when you're like this, when the opportunity comes around and you a keeper comes available, you think you can get who you think this lad's better than what we've got. Even if the lad you've got is a local lad, like we said, cracking player, played the last few seasons. Then you use that, you bring him in and say, well, we're bringing in someone who's better, and it's up to you to reach that standard. Because look, this lad's played at the top level in France for a couple of years, pretty much as never present. Then you go back, even as a young'un, he got a couple of games for PSG when he was a young'un, and now he was in the squad for the European Championships, and he's got a handful of Polish caps. So this guy's an international class goalkeeper. Now, in the Premier League, we can't go in with this theory of saying, that what we've got will do. You aim to bring in better players, and that brings them on. I mean, look at, you only have to look at Luke O'Nien. Luke O'Nien's an example for anyone, really, in that sense. We've brought in every player, we've brought better players in all the time. And then what he's done is made himself at least that standard, if not better. And he's added things to his game. Now, if you're Patterson, you couldn't have gone into this season or finished last season and just thought, oh, well, it's going to be as the two goalkeepers next season. I mean, if he did think that, then he's probably slightly naive to think that was going to be the case. He probably expected, and to be honest, the club probably said, look, we're gonna bring someone in to push you, and that's what you want. You want two goalkeepers fighting it out, and then like you said, if there is a dip in form, I mean, look, we brought Moore in this season, and look, as great as he is to have around the place, and look at the level he's played at. Look, if he was a top class keeper, he would have been in the Premier League at some point, and he hasn't been. Now, if you stick him in for 5 or 6 games in the Premier League, that's much different from the Championship, because in the Championship, how many chances did the opposition get against us? Now, in the Premier League, they're going to be peppering our goal, and you need someone decent in there. Goalkeepers who are of a standard, who you think, yep, either of them two could change with that number one. I think that's exactly what you want. And again, if this does come off, it's another sign that the club aren't messing about. I mean, in a that we think, actually, we finished last season, we think that's a really strong position. There's still strength. So hopefully, hopefully that bodes well for the position when you look around the squad at the minute that you think we're light in.
Yeah, and to move on slightly, Jonny, left back, again, another position where I mentioned before, Dennis Cirkin virtually unchallenged there. I know we had Leo Hjelde as backup. I think occasionally Trey Hume played there. But generally it was just Cirkin's position, wasn't it? Unless he was unfit. He's been linked with a move to Spurs. Around 30 million is the fee that's being bandied around, which seems like a lot of money for me. But, I think he's a great player. Other on the Chronicle, they've mentioned 20 million, which might be a little bit more realistic. But Dennis Cirkin, somebody who Tottenham know very well, was on their first team, I think, when Mourinho was there. And then obviously moved on to Sunderland in League One and has gone on to really prove to be one of the best fullbacks outside of the Premier League. And I would love to see him get that chance for us next year. They've had a change of manager. He's heading into his last year, I think, of his current deal, which is what makes this link interesting. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. None of us do. But it is interesting that this has came up and then we're being linked to another left back who is Angelino. I nearly got that wrong and I said Angelico. Angelino, who plays for Roma, again, could just be a link because we just took their director of football. But it just seems interesting, doesn't it, that left backs came up into the conversation now. And we're talking about, potentially bringing in a player who, different age profile, 28-year-old, already playing in a top league for a top team. I mean, he's rap sheet, ex-Man City, PSV Eindhoven, Leipzig. So he's played for subs. I mean, what do you think of this one then? Do you see that being a possibility?
Well, I'd certainly take Angelino whether Cirkin leaves or not. I think that's the kind of signing that I want us to be looking at, because a bit like you just said before, kind of strengthening from a position of strength. Yes, we are weak in terms of depth at left back, but it's not one of the positions in terms of quality of the starting 11 where you'd look at it and go, oh, we need better there. It's one of the positions where, like you say, Cirkin's proved to be one of the best fullbacks, not just left backs outside of the Premier League. So I don't think we're in dire need of an upgrade, but we certainly could do better, should be trying to do better, and crucially need bodies. I was banging this drum in January as well. I couldn't believe how short we left ourselves in the end at fullback. Now, thankfully, that risk or gamble, however you want to think about it, paid off, and obviously we went up. But if we go into a Premier League season with only sort of Adji Elise, Niall Huggins, and an out of position Luke O'Nien covering fullback, and Leo Hjelde, we're going to get tortured, aren't we? Let's call a spade a spade. That's not a good enough group to last through a 38-game Prem season and not, have a few drubbins in there with some of the quality of wingers they'll be up against. So I'm certainly hoping that we bring somebody in. I like the look of this lad. Everyone who's played Football Manager over the last 10 years will have heard about him at some point. Interesting that he's 28, because obviously that's not the general age range that we shop in. But a bit of experience would not go amiss in this squad. So I'd be happy to see him come in regardless. As for Cirkin moving on, I wouldn't like to see him go, because I think he's good enough to play for us in the Premier League. I think he's kind of earned the right to do it, and I think he's earned the right to do it here. he doesn't necessarily need to be an uncontested starter, but I'd like to see him in the squad. Having said that, last year of his contract, if it's true that the fees are anywhere near the 20 million mark, I'd be surprised if the club aren't giving it massively serious consideration, because that would be a lot of money for somebody in the last year of his deal who's not, I don't think has actually sort of completed a full season for us in any league since he signed. He's always had an injury somewhere, whether it's hamstrings, whether it's, the wrist injury he picked up this season, he's always missed some of the season. So, if I was Tottenham, I'd be thinking twice about spending 20 million plus on Dennis Cirkin. But, for that kind of money, you almost can't say no. But I hope he doesn't go, because I would like to see him stay. But if he isn't going to sign a deal, and nobody's going to know that apart from him, maybe his agent and possibly the club, but if he has decided not to sign, we've got to cash in. And if the money's anything like 20 million, I think you've got to take it. But, plenty of moves, I think, in that potential deal. Like I say, the contract, Spurs, like you say, have got a new manager. He might want to evaluate their squad this season, yada, yada, yada. There's loads of reasons why any of these might not happen, but maybe it doesn't quite pass the sniff test for me, I would say.
What's the best case scenario for you, Chris? Keep him, get him onto a new contract and also sign some strong competition? Or, because, again, as I said, with a goalkeeping position, Angelino, if this is true, which it could be total, to be honest, but a 28-year-old playing for Roma, is he going to want to come and be second fiddle just at Sunderland? Probably not. So what's the best case scenario with the situation? I mean, it could be any left back, really. It doesn't have to be Angelino. This could be bollocks. But is the best case scenario to get Cirkin tied down and bring someone else in?
Who's this? Could be bollocks. Is he from Bulgaria, or is he a lad coming through? Never heard of it. But on the Cirkin front, I remember I got a couple of messages from Spurs fans when Cirkin left and joined us, and they couldn't believe he'd left. They thought he was going to come through, be a cracking player, and they said you've got a good player there. And look, and Jonny touched on it. That's the issue. I mean, he needs to kind of complete a full season, and there were question marks. He went through a period last season where he looked like his head had gone for a little bit. He was making some really strange, rash decisions. He made a couple of really iffy tackles in the box where you thought, oof, we're either penalty away, or from memory, I can't remember whether he did or not, but I just remember wincing and he did it I think it was in the space of about 3 or 4 weeks. He just kept repeating. In the end, he got it out of his system, whatever it was. But yeah, and I just think with this link, for me, it would only be if he did go to Spurs, and again, I think Johnny's touched on a lot of it, but it would only be in the scenario, I think, where it was like a Jack Clark type deal. So it was almost a cheap deal for him because he's in his last year of contract, which would be probably in the region of 10, 15 million, which isn't as much as we would want, of course. And I think the 30 million is absolute nonsense in his last. Nobody's going to spend 30 million on Dennis Cirkin in the last year of his career. That's absolutely ridiculous. But if they need players for their quota, because of course they're in the Champions League, they need so many homegrown players and all this sort of stuff. Now, if they can get a cover at left back in their European squad for 10 million, it sounds like a good deal. So in that scenario, I could see it happening. But again, and then what does Cirkin think about that? Does he say, well, actually, I'm not going to season at Sunderland, more than likely based on my kind of injury record. So do I go to Spurs, play 15 games or something, maybe play a few games in the Champions League and get double the wages? Actually, it might not sound as daft as it probably would have on the 30 million front. But yeah, and there's going to be that question mark. And the club aren't daft. They're not to be held to ransom to Dennis Cirkin saying, I'm in my last year of the contract and, what am I going to do? Am I going to sign? Am I not? The club will just say, sod you. You can decide all you like. We'll want you to sign a contract. There's a contract. But if you're not going to sign it, we're going to bring someone else in. And in terms of the Angelino link, yeah, it's one of them that you do question whether it's lazy, because are we going to be linked with every Roma player or every Roma player who might be available? Because we've just taken their kind of director of football or sporting director of whatever title he had there. So yeah, it looks like, in terms of a permanent deal, he might have facilitated that for him, turned it into a loan deal. into a permanent deal. So he was probably involved in some of that. I mean, it looks like a good pedigree. Obviously, been some great places, and he'd be a good player, but does he fit? And if someone does come in like that, it's going to then be a signal to us to say, well, they've really changed the direction that we're going. They're not going to look at some, 20-year-olds and stick them straight in the team. Or, we're not going to see some player come from West Ham or something who hasn't played a senior game or something like that. We're going to sign a, 28-year-old turning 29 in January, midway through the season, who's, whatever we sign him for, his value is going to keep going down because he's going to be the wrong side of 30 soon enough. So, it doesn't fit what we're going to sign. But in terms of, as you said, put it the question, Gav, left back generally, we could see a lot of change there, because I think if it was interesting at the start of the season, Regis Labrie, when Elise was fit, I think he saw him as a centre half. Because if you remember, he started the season, I think it was alongside 09 or Ballard, I can't remember which one.
09. Yeah.
09, yeah. And it was Elise, he got the nod at the start of the season by at centre half. So I'm not quite sure he does see him as a full. And then Hjelde, it seems like he's a great character to have around, but he's not.
And is apparently injured, which is another bit of news, isn't it? There was apparently he's done an interview in Norway talking about an Achilles problem that he needs to have surgery on. So he's going to miss pre-season.
Yeah,
and he probably wasn't good enough anyways. Let's be honest.
Would you be surprised if he's played his last game for Sunderland? Probably not.
There you go.
And so we at least need cover there, because like I said, we know Cirkin's not going to complete a full season, and he's in the last year of his contract. So the links at left back make sense. I'm not quite sure what this one does. I've got a feeling it's a Roma link. That's kind of threw this one up. But a left back, I wouldn't be surprised if we brought one in.
Wouldn't be surprised if we brought one in, Jonny, but I would be surprised if we sold Cirkin. I just don't think we need to. I get what you said about if he's in the last year of his deal and won't sign another one, we have to consider it. And I take that. I just think that they're going to be keen not to break this team up too much. We've already lost two players. Do we need to and I mean, Cirkin's been pretty important to us. Do we really want to lose him? It's like, I actually think they're more likely to see how this one plays out up to January, because there is another transfer window before the end of the next season. So, we're not in a rush to shift him necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a personal opinion, but I think because we've got two contracts in the last year, which is Neil and Cirkin, right? I don't think you can risk losing both for free.
We've also got Luke O'Nien, Patrick Roberts, and to a less extent, Niall Huggins as well.
I thought Huggins got a new deal.
Oh, did he?
No.
But anyway, I mean,
Roberts and O'Nien, you can add to that.
Yeah, but so in terms of assets that could fetch a big fee, I think we're not likely to get more than 10 million quid for O'Nien or Roberts, are we? But Neil and Cirkin, if you've got 3-4 years on the contract and a big fish comes sniffing around, then you can start, just chucking zeros on the price and multiplying it by 2s and 3s. I don't think you can afford to let both of those run down the contract and go for nothing. And I think out of the two, I'd been to take a risk with Neil. If he hasn't signed his contract by the end of the summer, say, right, okay, fine, let's see how the season goes, because he's more reliable, he's fitter, he's the captain, he's a local lad, all that sort of stuff that builds up in his sort of advantages column. Whereas for Cirkin, I just think the injuries is too big of a risk, because let's say we start the season with him, not sign his deal, and then second week of September, buzz over, does his ankle, does his hamstring, dislocates his shoulder or something, he's out for another few months. No one's going to want him in January, and then we really are in trouble. So I just, and it feels harsh, like, discussing it in those terms, because obviously Cirkin's a good lad around the place by all accounts, and he's played well and contributed, but with your business hat on, I think he's the expendable one.
Well, just in terms of those contracts, because obviously, Premier League season, staying up in the Premier League is worth an absolute fortune. But what do? It's almost like stick or twist. There's a potential that you could be really ruthless and say to these players, let's just take Cirkin and Dan Neil, and say, right, well, because of the way your contract's going, we're going to give you a deadline by, let's say, for instance, just to put a date out there, let's say third week in July. If you haven't signed a contract by then, we're going to make moves, we're going to put your name out there, and we're going to start negotiating to get some money. Or you could turn around and say, actually, you don't mind that their contract runs down and you lose them for free, because if you look at actually Dan Neil, he didn't cost us anything in the first place, so you're not like you're losing anything. It's, and then Dennis Cirkin, he would have cost almost next to nothing. You probably haven't lost a lot of money, and if they play well for the season and keep us up, they've earned us a opportunity to then replace them. So it's that type of balance that they're weighing up now. What's the decision? Do they not mind them running their contracts down because they'll contribute and they didn't cost a fortune, so we're not losing a lot of money that we shelled out for them? So it's a strange decision that they have to make. And the thing is, you'd like to think these conversations were going on informally in the crowd, where an agent will give them a look that they're up for signing a contract. We'll just need to get it right and they'll sign it. So look, it's a real strange one, because I'm sure the club, Jonny said, with a business hat on, if they do that and then they think, actually, we could still probably get 15 million from him, even though he's at last year of his contract, there'll be a temptation there. But surprised to see them running their contract down until January.
Yeah, we'll see. Again, I just think, I said about Angelino maybe being a lazy link because of the Roma thing. Cirkin to Spurs could be the same. It just, if you're trying to make a story up, Spurs need homegrown players. He's not got long left on deal.
You'd be really surprised that you're talking about the 30 million thing. If Spurs were, you'd imagine Daniel Levy having a bit more nous about him when they sold him, to have a clause in his contract to say that.
Apparently that expired, didn't it? There was a buyback clause.
Interesting. Okay.
But it's expired now. That's the stuff seen.
You never, I mean, that even just makes it even worse, because he's never going to kind of lose out like that. He's never going to look like a twat like that, is he?
Yeah. Speaking of potential stories / possibly a lazy link, if you want to be cynical, Armand Lauriente, who plays for Sassuolo, former Rennes and Lorient. I've got to try and differentiate Lorient and Lorient. His name is a club, pretty much. But he did play for our manager at his former club, now playing for Sassuolo, who play in Serie B. He was the top scorer in that division last season with 19 goals. Clearly a player, but not playing at the highest level, Jonny. He's been strongly linked. A lot of people seem to think this is like a formality. This lad's going to come in. Another striker. I think if we're looking about, we're going to be looking for bargains, maybe players that are already known to the manager. That's why I can't shake this feeling it could be a lazy link, because are they just looking at players who've done well, who've already played for Regis Lebris and pointing out, Sunderland are interested in him? Or is it his agent trying to make lazy links to get his name out there? You don't know, but an interesting name nonetheless.
Again, interesting more because of the name and more because of, if it's true that we're after that player, then I think that again speaks a lot to the priorities of the club behind the scenes. Because I think Yunus would agree that in terms of, striking options, forward options, Mayenda and Isidore need to be in the, they'll be in the picture, whichever is going to start, if it's going to be either of them, whether one or both of them end up filling in on the wing through the season, all that stuff yet to be seen, but they'll be in the squad. Behind those, we haven't really got anybody else, have we? I mean, we've got Abdullahi, who, hasn't actually kicked the ball for us in competitive football, so not going to chuck him in at the deep end. So I think it's good to see the club, proactive. Again, if there's truth in these links, then it's good to see the club going after that position, because again, we all like Mayenda and Isidore. We all think they're great, particularly from the end of the season. Mayenda's heroics at Wembley. And they, again, we strengthening from a position of relative strength and not being too sentimental. So I think it's good. Again, it links with the other stuff that we've seen to paint a picture of quite a ruthless and ambitious sort of plan from the club for the summer, which is what we need. In terms of the player in particular, I can't pretend that I'd ever really heard of him before he was linked to Sunderland. I think you're probably right, Gavin, that there's an element of laziness to a lot of these links, particularly with. I mean, Gisolfi's not been confirmed yet, has he, to have come in? But assuming that happens, there's going to be all sorts of these links. Much like it's basically the equivalent of sort of 15 years ago, 20 years ago, when a new manager would come in and all of the transfer links would be his ex-players. Now it's, your new director of football comes in, so all the links are his ex-players or players he's dealt with. So in clubs he's dealt with and stuff like that, and things for players Labrise has worked with, which, to be fair, players Labrise, we have signed a few of those. Obviously, Lefebvre, Isidore being the two most notable. So I'm not saying that there's definitely nothing in it, but, I've never heard of him. He was playing Italian second division last season, so, 18 goals and 5 assists. Yeah, it's great, but how much can you map that onto the Premier League? I'd suggest maybe it's not a 1-to-1 ratio, so I wouldn't be disappointed if we sign him, but I'm also not going to be throwing my hands up in the air and dancing around in glee in the middle of my living room going, get in, we've signed Armand Lauriente, who I've heard of for 3 days. It's much of a muchness for me, the names. But yeah, I think I'd read far more into the patterns of links that are emerging rather than the specific names, because I think that's going to tell you much more about what we're actually than names dreamt up by an agent or a journalist somewhere.
Do we need another striker, Chris, do you think?
But I don't see this lad as a striker. If you look at his stats across his whole career, he's like a 1-4 at best, almost a 5. And when you read about him, he seems like he's in the Isidore Mayenda mold, where he's a wide player who can play up front, and he's exactly the same. So it'll be a third player who can do that, and Maybe that's exactly what we're looking for. Maybe we want players to be able to get out and come wide and swap positions, and if so, then fair enough. But I don't see him as 18 goals. Yep, he had a purple patch. You look at the rest of his career, he's not a striker according to his stats. And I was looking as well. I mean, in terms of them kind of crossing over, I think he only had a month with Regis Labrie from what I was looking at. I'm not quite sure about Gisolfi, but I know him and Regis Labrie didn't cross over too much, but you can imagine. I mean, God, they'll keep in touch with their old clubs, and they'll know who was there and coming through. Again, it's the and we look at. I'm coming back to, and I think it's the first time I mentioned it today, but the model, 26 years old. If everyone with their bingo cards can dab that one off, the model. 26 years old. I don't know. I mean, again, the first signing is going to be the signal, and Enzo Lefebvre. What he is 25, I think. So, we're starting to buy players potentially in their prime, in their kind of mid 20s, late 20s, and we might change direction in that. But we desperately need. Look, if we're looking at this player as to play on the left hand side, that we've only got Mundle now, because I think let's assume now Lefebvre, the Lefebvre on the land side was just let's get through the end of the season and all that. Lefebvre's a central player. Then that leaves us with Mundle on that left-hand side, really. And we've seen his injury record. He's still a young season yet. So, again, it does make sense, the link in terms of the position. And maybe the profile does slightly, because Isidore, he's 24, similar player, can play wide, can play up front. So you wouldn't be surprised to see, if we have Mundle there, that this is another option. We can play on the left or can play up top. So yeah, another interesting one. Again, the Lorient links and Roma links and all that sort of stuff are getting rattled off, and we'll just see how it goes, because you've got to assume at the moment that some of these are just lazy, I think.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. There's a few other names out there. I think Clement Bischoff is another one who we haven't talked about, a midfielder from Brøndby who, from when I was reading, was basically ready to sign for Brighton in January, and it never happened. Just while we've been chatting, there's some news came through about Marcin Bulka. Apparently, L'Équipe are saying the fee to sign him is around 20 million euros, and he's already received approaches from Galatasaray and Leeds, who he wasn't keen on. So, probably by the time we next do one of these pods, we'll know a little bit more about that one. But yeah, I mean, it seems like Jonny, we're making moves. It's just we're not seeing the concrete. This players through the door. But the club did highlight that pre-season is about to start very, very soon. It's crept up quickly, hasn't it? You know, pre-season's right around the corner, and we're good. You know, you would like to think if there's a chance of getting a couple of players through the door before pre-season starts, they'll do it. Just because it's going to be, we're already playing catch up. The other teams have already had an extra few weeks on top of what we've had, because we had the playoffs to deal with and we didn't know what league we're in. Now we do. It's almost like the window has shortened. Pre-season's about to start again. Before you know it, we'll be in Portugal. And then it's like, you know, the season will be around the corner. Games will be starting in pre-season. It just feels like we're probably on the cusp of a couple of deals getting over the line in the next sort of... I would like to think by the weekend we'll know on one or two fronts whether we've got players coming in.
Yeah, I don't know whether we'll have confirmation on stuff as early as the weekend, but I'd be surprised if we haven't had a Fabrizio Romano, here we go, or something, you know, by Sunday afternoon. And in Portugal, you know, obviously the players will be jetting off. For me, that's the key date, you know, over the next few weeks. I'm not so bothered about whether we have people in the door for the actual pre-season. I'm bothered about whether we've got people on the plane with the rest of the squad, you know, jetting off for that camp over in Portugal, which, I mean, I don't think they're over there for a massively long time, but to me, that's where you want to have at least your first couple in, you know, in the door, on the plane, getting to know the team, you know, participating in whatever things they'll have going on over there. I'm sure they'll have a couple of little bits of team building stuff and bonding stuff, as well as obviously training in the friendlies. But yeah, like, whatever we sign, you're going to be players who have already got a pretty good base level of fitness, and, you know, we're not going to be signing, as much as we love him, like Andy Reid, you know, rocking up, who looks like he might need to shift a few percent.
Yeah, I think them days are gone.
yeah, exactly. So it's less about like, oh, they need to be in bang on day one so they can get fit and all that. Bothered about, like I say, having them on the tours, having them for at least the majority of the friendlies, just so that they're in and around things and getting to know, you know, the club and how things work and the rest of the team and Labrise and his tactics and stuff, which obviously with any new signing, that'll gradually also build up over the course of the regular season. But yeah, I'd if we haven't had anybody in the door by the time they're off to Portugal, I wouldn't say it's time to panic, but for me, that's when I start getting a little bit concerned. So as long as we hear some more concretes by end of the week, start of next, I think that's a good thing. And yeah, the club are obviously going to be aware of it. They're not amateurs. You know, they know that they want players in sharpish. So I think it's good news that we're seeing so many links that seem to have at least a bit of substance about them. Because I think, it's, you know, you can only read between the lines, but I think it suggests that the club are working to a similar sort of timescale and deadline that I think we'd all want.
You almost find with a lot of the business we Chris that you don't hear about it until it's right about to happen. Quite good, aren't we, the club at holding their cards close to their chest? So you wouldn't be massively shocked, would you, if a couple of names came out of nowhere?
Shows the scarf picture, and I'll be bothered. But that's what makes it difficult to do these sort of things, because I'm kind of sure that all of the links are absolute fluff, purely because of how the club works. I mean, actually, I'm not 90%. No, I was actually kind there, 99%, literally. I mean, you look at the list. I mean, if anyone looks on the side at Bomber's piece that he puts out every week, look at the list of players we're being linked with. None of them are going to sign. And the players that will sign are just going to be fair, it might be more difficult for them to keep it as quiet as they have in the past with Premier League players and with agents who you're talking big money. That they want it out there that Sunderland are on the verge of signing them because someone else might come in and, you know, easily, to some clubs, they won't care. They just slap another 5 million on the price just to get us out of the market or whatever. So it might be more difficult to do what they've been doing in the past, but the way they work, I'm fully expecting to have never heard of the players, and for the first thing we hear is we've signed such and such rather than we've been linked with such and such. But look, you look at the squad, and again, I mean, John just touched on it, the club aren't daft. Look, we need, if not cover for all over the place. And I think actually that about the goalkeeper link, if you put the squad down on paper, you'd ideally want players that are better than the ones we've got in quite a few positions to then bring on those who, were already here. I mean, on the right-hand side, you've got Patto, Robertson, Poveda at the minute as cover. Now, you almost want someone to sit above them, don't you?
I don't almost want that. I definitely really do want that, please.
But absolutely. And then, look, you've got Isidore Mayenda and, basically as our front two. You want someone almost to come in who was better than them on paper and then push them to. And then, centre half, centre midfield. You look all over the squad and, we are bare when, and you take out the players that we've had on loan as well. And, you look at a couple of hints we've had. We've had Tom White talking about us that from potential sources that he's fully expecting us to break our transfer record again. And I fully bring in a couple of really good, at least one really good loan signing for the season. Because I think if you look at their track record, there's always been one or two loan signings who kind of really kind of pushed to the first team level, at the very least. And I think last season they found a good pattern with that, with Mepham at the back to come in and help them out. And we're really bare at the back as well. So look, this just by looking at the squad, we know we need players, and they certainly do. And they've been working on deals, and it'll happen because at the minute, and I remember talking about this. Remember when that year Ipswich just went nuts, and they bought like 40 players or something ridiculous, and we were like, no, we were really calm about it. We said we'll get all the business done, and in the end, it happened much later, but we got some decent business done, and it worked out all right.
But the point on stuff happening late's a good one as well, because you mentioned the loans, and obviously Mepham, I think, came in right at the end of the transfer window last summer, didn't he? And when we signed Ahmad, I mean, it wasn't quite deadline day, was it? That was later on, towards the end of August, I think, wasn't it, when he came in? And then, obviously, the caveat is they take a little bit longer to get up to speed and stuff, but I think you're right to point out that they'll almost certainly be targeting that market, whether it's a domestic loan from a big boy, sort of European giant. But yeah, that'll be late if it happens.
Well, yeah, because there's always that domino effect, isn't it? All these clubs have got their unit, and the caveat is they're going to bring someone in to then say, right, well, now we've brought someone else in, you can now go out on loan. And it depends on how early. I mean, we said about the impact of the split transfer deadline, how much that's going to have an impact. And it's interesting, we might see more in that actually, because maybe teams bringing players in before that competition might mean that these loan moves happen a little bit quicker. So we'll see. But look, they haven't even. I think, as you said, there's some key dates during pre-season. Obviously, coming back for pre-season training, going away for the tour, stuff like that. So I think you'll start. The club will try and target things, but the problem is it's not an exact science. We're talking about players turning down deals and having a choice, and agents trying to get money and all this. And as much as you would ideally want players in for the beginning of pre-season training, it's never going to happen.
Well, people might as well just skip the end then, Chris, because we've just wasted our time talking about all this, apparently.
There's no change there, though. We do it every week. Every week we're like, right, let's talk about the news. Oh, so these are all bullshit. See you next week.
Yeah. Where's Chris Rigg off to this week?
There you go. We mentioned him.
They're full house. Hey. Like, there we are.
Yeah, we'll see. I just, when Fabrizio Romano and L'Equipe comment on a story, you can't help but think there's something in it.
Yeah, that's the one that feels like it could actually go somewhere. Out of all the ones that we've heard, that's the one that has that kind of just passes the sniff test, doesn't it? Like you say, who's reporting it? It's a position we know that we need to improve on. It all seems to fit.
But 20 million. If that's true, 20 million euros on a keeper when that's one of our strongest position paper. Wouldn't be a bad start, would it?
No, and clearly somebody who's very highly rated. And as we always say, if we pay money for anybody, we're doing it because we think we can improve them and move them on eventually. And look, if we're spending 20 million on someone, they obviously see him as a 50, 60 million pound sale at some point.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, and me and Jonny's just trying to drag this out until Gav's voice actually goes at the minute.
Well, it's nearly there. I think this is a good chance to end off, because I've managed far much longer than I thought I was going to. Cheers for keeping us going, lads. You've helped fill in the gaps while I just recover and gulp water and try to concentrate on breathing. That's been the most difficult point. Cheers very much.
No worries.
No problem. You've done better at breathing than you did with your first attempt at the intro, like.
Yeah, that was, people will not hear that. Good. Thanks to listeners. Cheers for sticking with me and me voice. Hopefully, by the time you hear me again, I'll be able to talk properly. The effects of cheap Spanish alcohol, probably not what it says on the tin, paint stripper terps, will have worn off by then, and I'll sound normal. But yeah, thanks lads, thanks listeners. We'll be back with another pod tomorrow. See you then.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.